let's say from Poland to Argentina, so more than 12 countries overall. So for some of you, it will be a different time of the day, I'm sure. So welcome everyone. This is the third in a series of webinars, trying to look into some of the, current evolutions related to purchasing and supply management. And today we'll be looking at how to map business ecosystems, but try to be a bit more short for the first slide here. I've brought the topic of thinking in ecosystem. Um, just for your information, you are able to go on the bottom left of the facility you have in front of you. You can ask a question throughout the presentation using the chat, which is on the left side. So I see still people arriving, so I'm kind of just opening the webinar, the session. So welcome everyone again. I'm Hervé. I'm heading the Observatory of Value Creation at EIPM, and I'll be with you for the full webinar on the topic of thinking in ecosystems. Hey, let's start gently. Let's maybe the word ecosystem. Is this a new kind of jargon? Is this kind of a new trend, or is this really reflecting some of the evolution that we can see in the business world? And I think it's really important to put things back into perspective and to look at history. And I'm usually presenting the evolution of the business world and purchasing in the following 5 steps. So if we go back before 1870, we were living in a world of entrepreneurs. At that time, in this world of entrepreneurs, basically there was no department dedicated to a function dedicated to purchasing. It was the entrepreneur, it was the CEO of the company who was on the trade route, selling on one hand, but also buying on the other hand. What was needed to run the business? Because it's only in the latest part of the 19th century that we see, the rise of the big business, the rise of the very big company. First, probably example of this. The first example of this is the railroad industry, especially across the United States, but also the steel industry, and we saw also at that time the development of some important chemical companies. And the large companies have started to, offer some products that were available across the world. At that time, if you were you could own a Winchester carabine, one of these big guns, in many countries around the world. This was the first globalization. It was a fully standardized product. It was something that was easy to service, and therefore, it was sold everywhere, across the world. And another product example of this was the Singer, the sewing machine, which was also broadly accessible across different continents. And part of the challenge was to be efficient at that time with these fast-growing companies and large companies with multiple locations. And one of the challenge for them was to be able to get to scales, especially in the chemical, in the steel sector. And this is the time we saw the first purchasing department, purchasing function. We even saw some of them in the railroad industry, where the head of the function was directly reporting to the CEO of the company, and that was the case in the California Railroad Company. This was the time where the rail was needed a lot of new material. This is the time where we saw the first specification being put together related to steel, and this is the time where the quality, systems was introduced in order to make sure that what was delivered to the overall railroad was actually according to produced according to the specification that was sent to the companies. So the first book that was describing purchasing and the handling of railway supply was actually coming from that industry. Then came 1914, 1915. I mean, this is the First World War, and at that time, across the world, governments started to realize that the industry was important in order to support the effort of war that they were fully involved with. And therefore, they decided that they needed to close the border in order to make sure that their industry could be, developing within the boundaries of the country. So what we saw was a dramatic change. It was a change also in terms of industrial development. It was a start of the automotive industry, for instance, but with trade barriers, and therefore, we were in a world of, much more vertical integration. What does it mean? Simply that, from raw materials to the final product, everything, the vision was to have everything under one roof. This was the idea of Henry Ford when he put together the first automotive factories with the assembly line, and the idea was, he even had been buying some of the rubber plantation, but the broad idea was that all the raw materials could arrive on one hand, and he would be owning every single step of the process and making it so lean and effective that this would be very impressive facility in order to get a lot of 40, the black 40, out of the production line. This was the idea of applying the scientific management principles, time and motion studies to the automotive industry. So in this context of vertical integration, the role of purchasing became much more practical. It was much more about managing some contracts related to raw material and planning for bringing in some of these raw materials into the place. Then, little by little, we saw the evolution of the political rules related to trade barriers, and countries slowly open a bit more, notably because of the oil being important for everyone, started to open their border a bit more. And this got to a point in the 70s where, after the two oil crisis, governments around the world, this was after it was the Reagan Thatcher era, so that the only way to get back to a growth period was to boost competition across the world, open the borders, hoping that this will really boost growth across the world. So that's the time where we saw a lot of companies that used to be vertically integrated before, turning into leaner giants with global operations, global sales activities, focusing on the core competencies of the business, and then outsourcing some of the activities they used to run in the past. I remember working for Renault, and there was a time where Renault, the car manufacturer, was also making bicycles, was also making trucks, was also making some tractors for farming. But they were also owning a lot of the chain in terms of putting all the mechanical parts together that you could find in a car. So all this was outsourced. There was a broad process of supplier-based rationalization that took place, with the idea of building in front of every single large companies a smaller group of big suppliers who could, on their hands, benefit from economies of scale, standardize products, and come up with great price. We know the story. This was an effort in spreading across the globe with global sourcing, but managing all the flows of parts everywhere required to implement, supply chain management before it was supply management, but it was like becoming more complex. So that's when we started to hear more about this supply chain management. Risk was on the agenda, and collaboration, because after some of the low-hanging fruit could be sized, it was important to get into some more collaboration in order to have some more integrated supply chain. So here we know the story, because what I'm like, signposting here is more or less, the how we still operating in many circumstances, how we think in many circumstances. That's the the comfort zone, I would say, of the purchasing organization of today. But we had this process of slicing and dicing the value chain, and each of the company was pushed into the what we call the commodity trap. Standard products being available with competition around, less and less entry barriers and protection, and therefore you would be in a situation where you could be put into competition with many other players, and everybody wanted to, and is wanting to find ways of going beyond this commodity trap and to come up with new forms of differentiations, new ways of regaining an edge, and a new business model. And to do this, it's all about, sizing the benefits, the opportunities provided by a number of trends. The Internet of Things, which is we had a webinar on this one, which is really, pushing us to reinvent all the value chains and bring some new players all along. Sustainability, which is pushing us to think in terms of a circle through the circular economy instead of, this chain of a product that's pushed toward the, the end of the life cycle of the product. And also the personalization of everything. Today, more and more industries are pushing for, personalized medicines, personalized cosmetics, personalized experience in whatever, and this is also, driving the way the industry are being structured to, respond to this evolution of our consumers, but also on the evolution of the value chain. What does it mean for purchasing? Well, a number of things. We still have to think cost and cash, because with the economic challenge that we've seen, well, it's important to have that, to do that to continue to pay attention to this dimension, and this will for sure continue. But also to go for innovation from outside. Lot of increase in terms of the role of finding in capabilities and companies outside that can support innovation. And this logic of recombining. If we need to put some new business model, this simply means that we will have to recombine some internal and external capabilities, activities in different ways, and there is a role to play here for the purchasing organization. So this is the times of disruption. This is what we see today, and this is really a time where we need to start thinking in ecosystem. I'm going to show you the next slide, where that's clearly showing the current evolution. The moving from, well, what could be the vertically integrated company to value chain, supply chain, where you've got the raw materials getting transformed into component, getting transformed into subsystems, getting integrated by OEMs in final product. We are now moving to this broad, ecosystems where multiple players are currently competing, collaborating, close to each other sometime, fighting together at other time. For me, the clear example of this, is, for instance, IBM. If you go back in history, 50 years ago, IBM was doing everything from, to turn some sand into algorithm. So they were transforming the sand into siliciums by applying a number of, chemical process. Then they were turning this into semiconductors and electronic components. Then this was assembled into computers. and then you could add the software on the top, and you could deliver the algorithm afterward to the user. So everything from then to algorithm. Then it became a chain, and we saw little by little IBM selling some of its activities to other players, and then or spinning it off as a different company. And then what we have now is IBM being just one element in a much broader ecosystem, in a fully disintegrated value chain, which looks more like a large number of players who sometimes are competing, sometimes are collaborating. We see that across a number of industry. Chemical industry, it's very often the situation that your competitor is also your supplier and your customer. You have that in aerospace as well. So we're getting more of this complexity. And what's important is the co-evolution of each of the companies together. So basically, it's not just about me and the other, but it's about me co-evolving with other companies within the ecosystem. So we're moving from, sort of a mechanistic power type of game versus a more organic evolutionary process. Whether this will stay or not, I have no idea. Basically, we could go back in a few years after some technological waves have passed to a more classic shape of value chain, for instance. This is really something we shouldn't be ruling out. But for the time being, we see more of this kind of organic development within industries, and the boundaries are really blurring. I don't have any slide about all the Google, Apple, Amazon getting into the business of traditional industries, but this is this merging and blending of industries, which is done in much more organic process, step by step, with one step success detecting what will be happening afterwards. What does it mean in terms of purchasing? It means that, well, as I said before, we need to bring some innovation. And that's very often we just need to look beyond the obvious. Very clearly, we've been used to go to our key supplier, top supplier, in order to ask them, how could we be reducing the price of things, increasing the quality of that, or reducing time to, the development time or the time to delivery, by working in a collaborative mode with long-term contract. You're looking at building on trust and common values. But today we also, need to go to search for more radical type of innovation, which can be coming, of course, from existing supplier, but very often as well from new suppliers. Recently, what you've seen is Airbus, for instance, in order to implement the circular economy in its logistic chain, ensuring traceability of every piece of packaging they were using across factories, but also across suppliers as well. They've gone to two startups in order to track and trace all of these elements, thanks to a low power network from Sigfox, which is a startup active in this field. And sometime, these new suppliers will become long-term suppliers, or it might just also be a one-off in terms of having IP access, or building integrating some of their know-how into one of the existing supplier. So it could be very different ways of getting access to some radical innovation than going for face-to-face exchange with some of your main existing supplier. We see that everywhere. I mean, people in the farming industry, they're looking now more and more for distance capabilities. When we saw, I think it's important to come back to the electronic development. The electronic development was still done by R&D of some big companies, whether GE, whether companies like Philips and others, or Bosch, or all of this was done inside the companies, and then it went from military to aerospace to consumer products, the types of medical to consumer products type of application. But today, we need to go outside. All of this is not going to be invented within the walls of the existing big corporation. So we all have to go and get some of this new technology in. So in farming, you're looking at getting access to some of the sensors, some of the network that will be supporting the monitoring and analysis of all the data that could be coming from farms and fields in order to increase yield. In construction, companies are looking at what could be done thanks to 3D printing of modular blocks. It's still like a long-term vision of doing this, but we'll certainly see some application very soon in the future. Automotive, the future of the business could be depending of development in chemistry to support energy storages, and also about development of mobility services. So very different fields of what people in automotive are used to be confronted with, especially these days when most people have been working with the same the same type of players for a long time. And it's really challenging, because when you're working close with existing supplier, it's really difficult just to undo these ties in order to connect with new players from outside. Telecom and utility, it's interesting to see some of them all across the world starting to use drones and robots for maintenance, inspection. It was, sounding a bit like science fiction not long ago, but, now in China, drones are being used in order to, manage some of the maintenance and monitoring of the electric assets, electricity production assets, and transmission assets. Okay, so really, the idea is the ecosystem is not just to do more of the same in terms of, getting access to the players from the supply chain, but to be able to go beyond and getting access to new capabilities, like the one that I mentioned here that, you see kind of overall in the press, but it's much broader and, much wider type of capabilities that you would be looking at. So ecosystems, well, they need to be steered. We can't control them, we can't manage them from, but it's always important that we do what's possible in terms of managing these coevolutions, managing the balance between competition and collaboration, and finding ways of putting together some of the co-innovation. Already a few years ago, we've been doing a bit of data collection on some of these topics, and it was interesting to see that people in the purchasing organization in 2013, when they answered the first observatory survey, said that they mainly go for innovation and value creation to existing suppliers, but in the future they wanted to see more coming from startups, new player, tier 2, tier 3. So that's what you see on the graph here, where what you see is like for a startup and new player, people saying their current focus, only 24% are to a high or very high extent working with startup and new player. In the future, 54% were saying in 2013 that they would be going in that direction. Actually, we will be redoing this survey this year in order to see, what has been the evolution, and really trying to understand, if people have been moving in what they expected to see coming, and to what extent this has been happening. So hopefully, we'll be in touch with you for, getting your input into this future survey. So that was for me the broader perspective. That was for me the the way of trying to give you the background, the context, trying to show that it's all about changing the way we look at our supply market. It's no more just simple chains, one-to-one relationship, but there is broader forces that are forcing industries to merge, and new technology to come in and take some places, with new players coming in as well. And therefore, we needed to have a different way of looking at how things work. Any question at that stage? Okay, no? not for the time being. Don't hesitate and to pose any question. All is good for now. So now let me go through a little bit, how to think strategically on ecosystems. It's not our day-to-day job in purchasing, but this can be useful for you to, just to have a sort of a bigger picture of how could we think more strategic about ecosystem. So the classic way of thinking is the following: we know that this is part of our day-to-day thinking. We don't want to to depend of any of suppliers to have a we want to have every person in distribution customer to depend on us. And if we can be in that position, therefore we will be able to capture the maximum value. So that's the classic thinking. But then when you are in this very big and complex ecosystem, then the big question becomes, who is going to be making the lion's share of the profit? It's not going to be simply looking at power relationship across the chain that will be giving us the full answer to everything. We'll have to become a little bit more clever at analyzing who could be taking a key role into the ecosystems and capturing the best part of the profit. So the first thing is to look at it from a business lifecycle perspective. When you're starting a new business area, well, you really want to work together with the different members of the ecosystem. You want to work with the client, the supplier, some of the partner, in order to come up with the perfect solution at the right price, in order to be able to penetrate as fast as possible the market. At the same time, you want to make sure that you protect your IDs. You don't want to give away too much. So another ecosystem member could be starting to, kind of challenge you. One of, very simple example I always have in mind is, there was the first company that started to produce those very large screens to be sold in a stadium, for instance. And they were struggling because the stadiums, they were a bit cautious about investing big amount of money into having these big screens because they weren't sure that this was going to be high added value for them. And therefore one player came into the game and said, I'm really happy to to buy 8 screens to the company that was pushing in that direction, and they started to rent them. So they changed the business model from selling big screens to renting a few big screens, which really help the stadiums to sense what was the value behind them. But the company that was manufacturing was in deep trouble because their business model was broken for a certain amount of time because one of the ecosystem player had found one way of going around some of the pain point of the final client. Then you get to a point where when the product is going up, where everything is going well, you're in the expansion mode. And basically, well, the challenge is to cope with the demand. You can have fantastic situation here for a supply chain management and purchasing organization where the salespeople can relax and wait to put their offer together. That purchasing is able to secure everything in terms of production capacity from supplier in order to deliver. Now, this is the case, for instance, in industrial robots, where today, well, basically, some companies they can sell. The challenge is to build, and to build, you need to source, and therefore, you need to demonstrate to your customers that you have the capacity and you have the suppliers who can, deliver 2,000 robots, industrial robots, within a short amount of time, for instance. So managing the growth, but also defeating some imitation, and making sure that if you impose some strong power struggle across your ecosystem, or you try to maximize most of the profit, this will give idea to other players who will start to work together in order to create some Me Too product or build some alternative path to market, and then that could be defeating your plans in terms of keeping a certain level of domination on the market. And when you get to maturity, and here the picture is much too small The maturity phase can last for years and years and years and years, but it's just for a similar type of blocks here, and that's what we know very well in many cases within the purchasing back context, function, where we go out and we ask suppliers, what is it that we can do to be more efficient, to be more cost efficient, to take out some of the elements of the overall TCO and improve. So it's working together with the players within the ecosystem to offer something competitive and therefore maintaining your position in the market, because only some of the top players can survive. And the challenge is, as soon as we get into that phase, as soon as we're starting to get to the end of that phase, this is when we need to bring renewal. So when things are going down, where we are pushing the supplier to bring, some of the best cost opportunities, this is also the same time we might be looking for what will come into the future and what we'd like to see as future development. While being able to avoid some of the external disruption, having a company coming and taking over your position. It's fascinating to see companies like Airbnb, who now have more hotel rooms than some of the major hotel chain without having to own any of these. So it's been really going fast, and that's quite interesting to see this kind of development in short amount of time. Within an ecosystem, you can have a different role, and they could be structured differently. There's one case like the first one was is more of the classic dream of in many companies. We want to be at the center of things. We want to control the flows of innovation and the structure of the product. So we are at the center, and we ask everybody to bring innovation so we can assemble them and then deliver them to the final client. So we centrally manage ecosystems by making sure that we bring contribution from every player to the center. Then you have sequence ecosystem. This is typically the case of distribution, the Walmart, for instance, and basically here you can decide who's in, who's out, who's got the possibility of getting to market, and also you can kick back a lot of information. So your role in the ecosystem is not just to act as a gatekeeper, screen some of the players in some ways, but also to provide back a lot of information to some of the players into the market. This is what Walmart has done over time, and that has made a lot of companies addicted to working with Walmart. And after they've been forced to accept the power imposed by Walmart volumes on them. Another type of ecosystem is the facilitated ecosystem. The classic case is the American Express, where together with the card you have a lot of companies who can offer services, and depending on where you are in the world, you will have access to global services in terms of insurance, but you can have local services in specific cities, for instance. So basically, it's a facilitated ecosystem. It's different solutions, available for people who are registered into the American Express, either as a provider of solutions or as a user of this solution. I'll come back to this in a minute, because this is basically the model of platforms, and platforms are becoming more and more prominent these days, a lot talked about. So I think it's important to say just a few words about business platforms. And then the last type of ecosystem is the self-organized ecosystem. It's the Silicon Valley at the start was purely a self-organized ecosystem. You had a lot of people, inventors, and geeks who on a regular basis would be getting together in a bar and exchanging on what they were working in terms of semiconductors, mini computers, and all these type of things. And basically, there was it was all about technical wizardry and exchanging ideas and coming up with new ideas. And this is how the Silicon Valley developed over time. At some point, you've got some of the big companies coming into the game, and having some of their offices located in the Silicon Valley, but they don't control what's happening around. It's a self-organized. It's more than just you know working together, but it is about co-evolving over time. I see there is a question. So I have a question from Robert, which says, where do you expect more benefit from expanding our view of the chain to include many other ecosystem members? Point one, in exploration of new ideas for innovation, and in exploitation of other capabilities into new products or services by accessing knowledge. Well, I think those are two great points, Robert. Yes, today it's absolutely it's absolutely important to be able to look at the big picture. Let me try to give an example. I've been spending a bit of time, over the past weeks discussing with people from the food industry about, smart factories, for instance. And when you think like a smart factory that's here to help produce food, well, you will be buying pieces of equipment, but you will be buying also software, and you will be buying some of the maintenance services that are going along with it. Huh? So there's different dimension. By looking at the full ecosystem, there is the possibility of understanding how you can get access to innovation, how you can find new, well, I would say not partners, but capabilities, know-how, which can be coming from suppliers where you didn't use these capabilities, or could be coming from new players that are coming next to you into the future. And then thinking in ecosystem is about asking the question with whom we should work and how we should work. I'll be giving some example later of it's not just about one-to-one collaboration, but multiplayer collaboration in order to bring together everything in terms of the new processes, the new business model, the new services. So it's not just about exploring things; it's also about exploiting things. If we take some of the academic terminology. I have another question. Yeah, one question about, is this just self-organized, means just open communication, or is it something more? No, I think this is definitely something more than just open communication. I mean, today we have means of exchange all over the world, and we can be in open communication. But people in the Silicon Valley, they were sharing some a certain culture, a certain view about the world, and at the end, their face and future was depending of what was happening around them. So it's not just about being open to what's happening around. This is in the clusters, in this self-organized ecosystem. This is it's a part of the world that has a common future, and players will do good if others are doing good. So I think it goes well beyond purely open ecosystem. I have another question related to yeah, the slide. Yeah, the slide is dating back from 5 years. It's true. It was put together in 2012 by Deloitte. And the question is it still the same, and what will be the direction of the future? What I would say is probably, the a lot of companies who would dream themselves being, in the centralized type of logic. I want to be at the center of the industry and being able to control the flows of innovation, so I can capture most of it. Be this, type of the food chain kind of player, so I can make the most out of everything. But what we'll probably see more and more is, more development in terms of facilitated ecosystem, and this is actually what we've started to appear in terms of business platforms. So we're used to see them through our Apple iOS market and the Android market. So basically, a platform is a two-side market where the users can get access to a number of solutions, and producers can come and put into the market their applications. So the company at the center is not controlling everything that's on it, is not deciding one by one what's on the marketplace, but they provide some rules and some facilities and take, some data out of the transaction, or take some margin out of these types of transaction. And as industries are becoming more and more complex, more and more data is being put together and used in very different contexts, then we will see more of these platforms, coming at the forefront of the exchange. For smart factories, there is already battle platforms with, companies offering, some form of some software where you can access, different source of data and algorithm from different companies in order to mix that with your existing data coming from your equipment, your supply chain, for instance. So that's probably one of the key one that we will be talking more and more, and that we already see, mentioned increasingly, the business platform. What does it mean in terms of, so back to my question, and who is going to take a share of the profit? Well, we used to say, well, if not many players are able to do something, they have unique capabilities, so, potentially they'll have more chance to capture a part of the profit. Intellectual property was also a very strong one, where we've, taken some of the basic reflex of making sure that we have the right way of looking at it. Well, hopefully, because I know it's always a very contentious debate. But basically, with this full transformation that's coming up, with the the circular economy, with the Internet of Things, with the personalization of everything, well, basically the number one point will be, who will be able to control the industry architecture. Who will be able to be at the center, control either the data or the flow of activities in such a way that there'll be the dispatching point for profit for others, and controlling this. Typically, in order to stay in that role or to gain that role, a number of companies who are already established players, they will do a number of things, and they will try to prevent other companies to take the integrator role. So they will try to avoid the development of open standards where everything can be connected to everything from a standard point of view, and control this platform. So think of, for instance, connected buildings. A number of years ago, 10 years ago, the companies that were active in this field, they would design a custom-made solution for every client. There was no like, taking some blocks here and there and connecting them together with the brand of, the information system provider, the IT equipment provider, and then the brand of the company putting together the connected, building technology around. So little by little, there has been further specialization. There's been, further communication from the different solution provider or specific solution provider to the final client. And nowadays, it's much more difficult for the companies to maintain close standards. De facto, you might be working in a certain environment, and like hotels, and where you implemented the connected building in hotels, where you might see the client forcing you to use Samsung TVs for displays of information across the hotel, because it's easily connected to other things they have and things like that. So they've got less opportunity to shape, and that's what we discuss here in terms of controlling the architecture. The second element could be about the customer experience and the responsibility. If we hear a lot of people in the automotive industry these days saying that safety is absolutely important, and they are the final player that's accountable for safety, and that they're doing a lot of effort to manage that. it's really telling everyone that people should pay for the brand of a car manufacturer because there's safety associated to it. If tomorrow the autonomous car and the electric car are working in such a way that there is no safety issues, well, a lot of the users will undervalue suddenly the brand because, you know, it's not them that's guaranteeing the safety of, you know, for them and for their family. And this could lead to, a dismantling, you know, of the current architecture of the industry. And if you couple that with the development of mobility service and companies really good at managing customer experience for mobility service, we could see a world where, you know, there will be less cars with brands, and, you know, there'll just be some vehicles around and we'll be, you know, paying by the kilometers. Hopefully, we'll see some changings anyway in this area, because you know, that's really needed, I guess. And, you know, there's other elements, any ways of managing very closely all the customer experience. The need is a way to control the industry, but also managing, you know, the scalability, managing the growth, ensuring that not everyone can get access to the resources that are necessary in order to go through, you know, the development of a certain business model at some point, you know, is absolutely essential here. So scale advantage is still one element that can allow and dominance of some activities can still be something that can, you know, prevent an architecture to be broken down. So, you know, that was just you know, a quick enter into the theory of a strategy. This graph is coming from Jacobides. It was published in the Harvard Business Review about 10 years ago, but uh, you know, this is really some of the most advanced way of thinking about strategy. It is about controlling the architecture of the value chain and what can help to make this work. And when ecosystems are more and more dynamic, well, you know, what will ensure profit for the future is not simply the short-term negotiation, but it's really this kind of evolution of who does what and who gets what across the ecosystem. Hey, do we get any question? Do we have any you know, any point at that stage, or we get into the very more practical aspect of things? No, I guess we had some questions during the presentation itself. So okay, we started with what's the context, huh? Why do we need to think in ecosystems? Because the world has changed and it's no more chains, but it's more complex co-evolution of players are taking place. And then we came to the question of thinking strategically in ecosystems, and we looked at, you know, what could help us to understand who's going to take the lion's share of the profit. It's not just about unique capabilities and IP, but it's also about, you know, some of the factors that can help to control who does what and who gets what, you know, across the ecosystem. But first, you know, number one thing is to be able to think and to work with the ecosystem and to map, I would say, understand the ecosystem. And what I'm going to be showing you here is a methodology we've developed at EIPM in terms of, you know, being able to understand, you know, ecosystems and being able to develop strategies for ecosystems, especially for, you know, people within the purchasing function, but not, you know, not just working alone, just, you know, potentially also working with business partners. And 2 weeks ago, I was in Germany with a company in the cosmetic industry, and it was really great, you know, because I had together with me for the 2 days people from R&D, people from purchasing, people from marketing, in order to map some ecosystems and look at options for the future in terms of, you know, bringing some of the innovation there. This was a really fascinating experience, just to have everybody on the table and, you know, and to look at players, outside players, opportunities together. Ecosystem analysis, here are a few principles. And typically in a purchasing context, what we look for is vendors. So we look at companies more than anything else. When we think ecosystem, we think capabilities. What's important is the ability to do this and that, the ability to deliver a certain level of performance. And the capability doesn't need to be, fully polished, fully refined, but we need some new capabilities in order to deliver, the performance of the future or some elements of differentiation. In the end, of course, capabilities need to be owned by companies, but, if you're buying equipment to manufacture cheese, for instance, well, in that case, you could be building a database of all the capabilities of your existing supplier, but also potential supplier. So when a new project is coming up, you don't just search a supplier, but you look for who's got, this capability that could help me to wrap a little piece of cheese into aluminum foil very quickly, for instance. It's not just about the current market. Very often when we do a market analysis in the procurement context, into the supply market context, well, we just look at what's happening, what are the forces, the classic Porter 5 forces within at this local level and today. So we're interested in, who's number one, who's number two, who's number three, and how I can build on that in order to, get the best price or get a little bit of extra mile in terms of, pushing a performance or a slight differentiation advantage. In terms of ecosystem, what's very important is not just to understand what's happening now, but is to look into the future. We talk about the automotive industry, for instance, and people are saying, well, Google and Apple, they're competing with the big brands of the automotive world, where at the end of the day, what we should all expect is to see more collaboration than pure competition. And therefore, it's important not just to think about today, but also about the future. That's why we're using in the methodology that I'm sharing with you today a lot the logic of the trends, trying to understand what are the trends that will be influencing, the ecosystem, and not just trying to understand the past. The market analysis is very often done as part of a category strategy, and this is done once in a while. Ecosystem analysis can be done on an ongoing basis. Just put a few big paper on the wall, and then you can just bring people along and start to map some of the interesting players coming in and out into the ecosystems over time, zooming in, zooming out. You won't have everything into the picture immediately, but you can develop it and improve it over time. So we talked about that. It's not just about who competes with whom. It's also about who collaborates with whom, and managing this balance between competition and collaboration. It's a rather long-term, not just short-term perspective. Very often we tend to have a rather short-term perspective, and it's not just the job of the buyer, but it's a broader job in terms of business partner. Key steps in order to go into that direction: define the scope. So you need to apply that to a certain scope. List some of the key trends for the future. What will change the face of the ecosystem? From that, you can spot some of the players, map the ecosystems, analyze the dynamic in terms of competition, collaboration, and then develop the next steps. I see there is a question coming here. Yes, which is from Ala. Yes, you're asking if it's got to be done as part of a category strategy or if it's done as part of product development activities. Well, I think that I could say yes and no to both questions, to both points. Some of the way of looking at the segmentation of a category, can be quite narrow those days. And therefore, it might be interesting not just to have a pure single category perspective, but maybe to expand it a little bit, looking at broader segment and broader things. So, for instance, if you are working in the again, I'll take the equipment of buying production equipment, for instance, where you might be needing the production equipment, the maintenance services, the information system that goes along with it. So if you want to do an ecosystem analysis, if you just take one element, well, this could be too tiny. So be ready to open a little bit from a pure classic category or segment perspective and to look broader. But definitely, this is something that you can do from your segmentation perspective. In terms of integrating this into new product development activities, I think it even comes ahead. It's not just part of the product development process, but it's before, as part of developing roadmap for future product, future services, future business model. Some of the innovation team, can find value at early stages to look at, the ecosystem, because this is in a way a good support to start to, develop and design new business model and to come up with, some of the innovation. So if you do it too late into a development process, it just might be too late. It's something that can be needed as part of a broader business unit strategy, for instance, or some innovation projects, coming up across your organization. So defining the scope and defining what's in, what's out. I will share an example that we've developed together with one of my executive MBA students who was working for Group Seb, which is, manufacturing and selling some cooking equipment. So we took the rather simple case of a blender. It's great because we can all kind of understand what's behind and start to discuss on this and illustrate the methodology using that. Not the content has been sanitized, and in order to make sure there wouldn't be any kind of a competitive issue with what I'm going to be showing. So the value is purely informative and illustrating the methodology. So first you need to define what's in, what's out. Well, in fact, for the case of the blender, and the first step was, the first idea was to look on a much broader perspective, and then we went back after a few steps on the scope because we felt it was important just to just to break it down a bit further. So here for the blender, we said this is the business unit who's delivering blender. In fact, they had two brands, Groups and another one, and Moulinex offering blenders. And we look at different features in terms of robust design, cooking performance, price, multifunction, and blenders that can be easy to clean. This was also giving some orientation in terms of what we're looking at. We're looking at a solution into the ecosystem that can provide some broad answer to these elements. Then the second step, when you've defined the scope, is to say in a simple way, what are the key trends? So here, this can be a quick brainstorming, or it can be a broader, longer exercise building on macro trends identified at corporate level, for instance. Trends from a customer, political, economical, social, technological, environmental, legal point of view. Whatever works with you in terms of a checklist, works for me. This is not about putting the trend into the right box, but it's simply having a few triggers that can help you see what could be done. So that's the elements. When you've done that, the value of the trend is it's gonna give you some hints about the player. As soon as you talk of the trends, you've got immediately the image of players coming to your mind. So we don't map the ecosystem by starting to say what are the existing player, the future player. We use the trends as a way to reveal some of the future player. If there is new technology coming up, this means that there could be players behind these capabilities. If we have a new force of competition in the economic side, then this would reveal also new players coming into the game. And if we have some of the associations coming about sustainability aspect, then this would mean that we would have new players who would be influencing the ecosystem. So In the case of the blender, we have the following element. It's again, it's just like an extract, a summary. Some of the elements, the European market, we decided to focus on the European market, which is maturing today. So, potential of extra sales by, conquering new households was limited. No political impact. The organization of the industry is being impacted by, this omni-channel retailing. So before, the company was putting through different channels, some of its product. Now everything's tend to connect together. Basically, the idea is, if you go into a shop, then you start to look on your phone about, what's the price on Amazon and what's the rating in some of the places. So trying to prevent, too much of you create your own experience by offering a great customer experience directly to the user by connecting the different dimensions of your channels already from the start and adding value to it. So one of the elements here is this can be done by using some of the connected technology. So we didn't put the startups that are putting together this connected technology into technology, but we put it here because they're really changing, the structure of the relationship with the client and the structure of the industry. And so on and so on. Cooking is becoming more and more of a life experience, and therefore you've got a TV program producer. There's more and more touch screens on some of these products, and this is forcing companies like THEP to think of ergonomies because touch screens are required to be handled in the appropriate way. I'm sure you've all made the experience of being in an airport and trying to punch on one of these big machines and feeling like, oh, it's not working. So basically, when you have that in the on your blender, you want things to be pretty slick and working well. Okay, so let's move on. Yeah, I see a question. So question is, do you involve other partner players to identify trends? Well, the first thing is, just don't do that alone. I would say that if you're just doing this as a, procurement, purchasing focus, this would be limited. So of course, here you can first put together around the table as we did a few weeks ago with this company. We had people from marketing, people from R&D, and people from purchasing together. So this provides more opportunity to look at the broader trend, especially as people from marketing, R&D. This is also, some of their job to, to keep an eye on what's happening outside. Of course, we had a session on trends, and I've been providing a lot of source of information that can be used in terms of thinking more in terms of mega trends. And there's a lot of consulting companies providing information about, the evolution of certain market or the trends that are going to impact how we work, how we live, and how cities will be operating into the future. So it's indeed possible just to have a bit of a scouting exercise or taking a bit of time just to build on first exchange and build up of information and to add to the game. I see more and more company doing this, and I see more and more purchasing being involved in this kind of a broad trend thinking type of activities, especially as part of the Peter Krajic Award winners that we've been visiting over the past few years. So important element. Of course, you can ask, the view of some existing suppliers, but they will tend to provide, probably some of the trend that will be, going along their own plan. So I think you always need to be, just to be careful and not spend too much time in analysis. The idea is to, raise some hypotheses pretty fast, so you can go and test them quite quickly. So that's when you start to map the ecosystem, try to keep the picture as simple as possible with, the customers, the current value chain members, so who are your existing supplier with whom you have interactions, raising a new player who comes from the past page following the trends analysis, and then the influencers, so who are the bodies, probably more governmental bodies or associations, civil society, that could be influencing what will be happening. Also, international bodies, certification norms, all these kind of things that could be, having an impact on what's going to be happening into the ecosystem. So in the case of the SEB blender, we had on the top, we decided to put the different element of distribution relating to this omni-channel trend, distributors, specialist retailer, online channels. And then we have the current value chain member. I mean, actually, the red dot could have been a bit further up on the border between the two, because in some ways, you have some of the factories that might be below, and you have the more the market side, which is further up, but doesn't really matter. Then you've got some of the key players. One of the challenge here is you can break down things into many sub elements. So you will need to be careful of not to putting too many. But don't forget, you want to understand who's going to compete, who's going to collaborate with whom. So if you've got 25 players into the current value chain members, a full picture of the ecosystem with hundreds of players, this is gonna be a bit challenging for you to manage afterwards. So you need to find the right level of granularity. So here we had the glass jar supplier, the designer, who's just helping to put together the final design of the blender. Electronic integrator, provider of blades, motor, materials, and electronic component. We added the tier 2 because on a regular basis they were meeting some of the tier 2 suppliers in order to discuss some of specific features, specific performance they could get from them. Rising new player, we put ergonomists, and remember this was mainly about the touch screens. And this is about the material supplier. If you think of the blades, for instance, they were looking at options of releasing more flavor by using different type of materials for the blades, for instance. And nutritionists, in order to also be able to understand, what would be bringing the best nutrition quality and also some of the flavors. And connected startups with some connected technology, could be also rising new players that could be interesting to keep an eye on and to work with within the ecosystem. Influencer, classic technical bodies, and some of the more social regulation, maybe some of the players who are rating some of the product and all this, and giving views about sustainability. So you start to put together a full picture, a map of the ecosystem. And that includes player you currently work with and player you might not yet be working with. But before we go into with whom we should be working with in the future, the next step will be to understand who is competing, collaborating. Just for information, I'm not going to go through this, but you will find in the slide that we'll be sharing later, and you will find some questions that can be used to trigger some reflection at every stage of the process. So, who could be coming with some disruptive technology? Who could be acting as an integrator? I mean, simple, basic questions that can help you to think a bit more creatively, around the map of ecosystem. Analyzing dynamics. So today, the future, you need to find a date. On the right side, we have the 20xx here. So basically, today, who competes with whom on what? Tomorrow, who will compete with whom on what? It can be just about, competition on the marketplace, but it could also be competition in terms of getting access to talent. Today, there is a battle between, some companies and the software companies, because if you want to attract some of the best software programmers, in your company, well, you need to offer, an environment that's really attractive to them. So we don't always compete on the final product. We compete on resource. We know that very well in the procurement side. This also applies to people. And on the bottom, you can have today who collaborates with whom. So you can check across, the market intelligence, your own knowledge, trying to understand who is talking to whom to try to develop, some innovation across. So that will be helpful to understand the dynamic. And for instance, and this is where we would see that yes, today maybe Google is battling with BMW, but maybe tomorrow, BMW and Google would be working together on some application because they could be finding some joint interest of collaborating instead of competing. So here in this case, we saw that the brands were the main players in terms of competition today, but they could be challenged tomorrow by connected services. We started to see new players coming into the home robot market, for instance, and the connected robot markets for household. So vacuum cleaners and some of this cooking equipment, now, they come from nowhere. There's a new name. And basically, these are people who are capable of buying, finished product, most of the time from Asia, adding a little bit of software, putting together, some of the website, having some online access to online sales and challenging existing players. And if some of them manage to deliver a customer experience, that's really much value because of the connected aspects, they introduce into the product. This could be a real challenge for the established player in the market. In terms of collaboration, the company SEB is working with the glass supplier, with the designer, with the electronic integrator, and the components manufacturer. But this is mainly on a one-to-one basis. So they took to all of these people as part of the development process. And in the future, there were two things, and they came up into some of the learning. Basically, it's not just about SEB talking to each of them independently, but it's also more, joint work across the different players of the ecosystem and introducing new player like the nutritionist on the first group and the some of the startup who are coming up who could be interested not to compete but to collaborate with them. So that was the way of analyzing the dynamics, coming up with some interesting discussions. We also provide some checklists in terms of who have, for instance, similar opposing agenda, similar common or opposing interest, who will be the data that will become essential in the future, who could be owning it. I mean, this is all sorts of, ways of thinking about the dynamics of collaboration and competition today and tomorrow. I hope you can still hear me because we've got a major storm outside here. So we're on the first floor, so that should be fine and we should be safe. But probably a little bit of noise for the time being. But we can't do anything about it. Then you can go to the next steps, which is really to identify with whom you could be starting to work with in the future. So maybe you would be deciding that some of the players, some of the capabilities you will continue to monitor. Maybe you say, hey, let's have a go of, creating a workshop to try to see if there is benefits, testing some hypothesis with one player, or maybe going into some stronger collaboration with another player. So in the case of SEB, what we came up with was, a number of things that needed to be monitored. For instance, connected technology in other industry. There's a lot of benchmark that can be done of the food industry or some other, devices, connected devices that we find in households, where they could keep an eye on, trying to understand, what could be interesting here. Early involvement, they wanted to develop a workshop with a motor supplier because they were expecting that high performance motor would be bringing some very interesting features and performance and differentiation here. And also they wanted to have some collaboration with the nutritionist and the motor supplier, the blade supplier, all of them together in the same room to start to think to a number of points. And then to build a project, bringing together some of the electronics dimension and maybe some people with ideas in terms of launching new business over there. So some co-development they were looking to launch into the future. Ah, yes, I have a question coming. So the question is, yes, this is about indirect procurement. So is this only applicable to full product or no? Question about indirect. No. Well, as a matter of fact, you know, this is also something that you can be using for other type of activities. If you look at indirect these days, you know, you're having access to travel, which cover, you know, taking planes all over the world, but also sometimes renting cars. You also have, as part of transportation, some of the taxi and some other means of transportation and things like that. So if you don't just look to, you know, to neural, then you can look at the food mobility, for instance, and then you could come up with new ways of thinking through the ecosystem. One of the executive MBA students from a bank working in Belgium did a full ecosystem analysis and came up with some ways of you know, offering a cafeteria plan. So people have a number of points and they can either have a fleet, a car fleet, or I mean a car, and or they can have access to public transport or number of points being used on the BlaBlaCar for you know, sharing sharing a car on a regular basis. So you know, it's not just for you know, the product related activities or the solution related activities, but it's something that you can, you know, also use in some of the indirect things of marketing, sales type of spend. You know, there's so many things happening, so many new technology in terms of media promotion. You don't even know if this is direct, indirect in many ways. You've got now, you know, on the some of bottles that we buy, you've got some, you know, some QR codes, and you've got ways of indirectly interacting. You go in a shop and you start to interact with your ice cream cabinet. So, you know, all of these are also connecting with media agencies. So we see that there is more blurry type of boundaries across, you know, even what's direct, indirect, and probably time also to abandon this classification. I think we need to look at it as there is a, you know, spend for every part of the business. Spend for, you know, the operations, spend for the R&D, spend for marketing and sales, and also a certain spend that supports, you know, the customer, the employee, and the organization as a whole. And for each of these, you can apply the ecosystem thinking. As soon as, you know, new players are coming up and the challenge are coming from different origins, then that can be quite possible to use this type of tools. So we covered the full methodology. I think I would like to raise one aspect as well. It's not just about understanding what's happening behind the walls of the company, but in order to have a good business ecosystem, you also need to have a good human ecosystem. So you need to have a network of individuals who are really supporting the positive collaboration and the development of the ecosystem that's really bringing things forward. So as you look at the scope, look at the trends, yes, you can go on the route of defining the business ecosystems, putting together some scenarios, some business model, testing them, getting to do things, but also you need to think of what's the human ecosystems, what are the people that you need to be, you know, to be part of your network so you can make things happen and you can really go in, you know, testing and doing things in effective ways. So my recommendation here is to do a number of things, you know, clearly identify your existing, you know, ecosystem team member, but also potential ecosystem team member, making sure that you can have access to, you know, some of the people who are taking a leading role in some of the startups that could be contributing to your environment. For all of them, whether in or beyond, the usual, you need to understand what are their pain points. What's preventing them from, making progress. Basically, we get the support, we get the buy-in of everyone when we get rid of pain points, when we get rid of blockages. And understanding constraints is another good way of, being able to bring things forward by getting rid of these elements. And also trying to understand what's the vision of all the players, trying to understand if all of this is compatible or not. So I'm sure you're very skilled at doing stakeholder analysis, mapping stakeholders, trying to understand impact, power, and all of this, across stakeholders. My recommendation would be to be very inclusive, not just the core stakeholders, but also the one that are, supporting the new players, understanding not just what they want, but also what they don't like to see happening, bringing also their constraints and their vision of the future. That'd be a great way of facilitating the inclusion and the bringing up of everyone together. Conclusion for me, because we're getting to the end, we need to challenge our mental models. We're so used to look at, our little sandbox and our little field that we lose sense of what's happening over time, and we lose sense of, what's behind, the key players that are in front of us. So we really need to look at the trends that will define success tomorrow. And this is really important to take time, to stop this madness of jumping from one project to another, and reflect with a bit more creativity, with a bit more reflection on what could be happening in, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. It sounds like, woof, it's not at all what I'm dealing with on a day-to-day basis, but, this is what really, what really we need to do in order to, just take stocks and looking ahead on a regular basis. We need to welcome the idea that collaboration is essential to success. We were used to have this long-term collaboration with people we knew well. When I was working in the automotive industry, people that were from Renault and people were from the Michelin tire company, they knew each other for many, many years. And the human network was very well established, common language and all that. Well, today it's not just about the usual suspects, but also going to other players in terms of bringing them. And it's not just about one-to-one collaboration, but sometimes multi-party, multiplayer types of collaboration. We need to accept that, part of the ecosystem, we will have players that could be a customer, a supplier, a competitor. We need to be understand when we can allow that to happen and when we need to find a way of escaping this. In some circumstances, this can even have some value of, collaborating with some of your competitors. I'm thinking of sustainability-related issues, for instance, but there's many more, contexts where that could be making sense, especially in the IoT, and there will be some needs of having some common standards across all players. So more than two to tango sometimes, yes. So it's not just one action, one player. I mentioned that. And in terms of behavior, we tend to still wait for, give me the right specs, give me the right needs, and then I'll be able to get you what you want. We need to anticipate. We need to understand the pain points so we can see if outside in the broader ecosystem there are players who can bring solutions to the problem that we need to work on. It takes also a bit of entrepreneurship, having a go at things, proposing stuff, testing ideas, and then, just being at ease with, the acceptation or not of these ones by, the other players, and some form of simplicity in the relationship, the process, and the ways of working. Where we're dealing with a startup, we need to be a bit more agile than, applying the 180 checkpoints that we have in some circumstances before taking on board a startup. So, companies are starting to put some pre-screening stuff on them, for instance. And the last point is, it's not just about the negotiation capability. There's many more on the human side. It calls for facilitation, and here, we don't need to be the best at everything. So let's build on what other functions in the company can offer. You probably have in some of your companies some people who are managing, who are part of the innovation team. I'm not saying R&D, but some innovation units, and they have a lot of tools and techniques in terms of coming up with new ideas, doing rapid prototyping, doing a lot of the test and rapid development that you can be using as part of the facilitation of the workshop with suppliers and the development of collaboration within the ecosystem. That's it, really. We've been looking at the why, what does it mean from a strategic perspective, but also trying to share with you a little bit of the how, both on the business ecosystem and on the human ecosystem. We will be sharing the slides. We will be sharing an article I've been writing on the topic. We hope you will be taking part in the future data collection for the observatory, and hope you enjoy the session. Hope you will be getting some ideas out of it, and that you will feel like having a go at it, and you'll start to map some of your ecosystem. Any last question? If not, this will be time for me to say goodbye. Enjoy the evening, enjoy the day if you are on the other side of the ocean, and looking forward to see you maybe in one of our next event or maybe one of our next webinar. It's been a pleasure to answer your questions and to try to share some of the passion I can have related to developing ecosystems. Have a great day. Goodbye.